Hey there, my lovely Longhorns. It's Miss Campbell, and today we're going to go through 45, 45, 90 triangles. Okay, so these are called a special right triangle. They're one of two kinds of special right triangles that we're going to look at. And they're special right triangles because you see these 45, 45, 90. Whenever you see those three angle measurements, certain things always apply to your triangle. So here I have a right triangle and I'm going to label it. So this is my right angle there. Okay, and then since we're talking about 45, 45, 90 triangles, these two other angles here are going to be 45 degrees. Okay, let me fix my pen here a little bit. Make it a little bit bigger for us to see. Okay. So 45, 45, 90 triangles is what we've got. So sometimes you'll see these things called right isosceles, okay? And the reason for that is because number one, it's a right triangle. And number two, if we remember back to what we learned on isosceles triangles, whenever you have two angles on your triangles that are the same, the sides that are opposite from those, okay, angles, they're going to be congruent to each other. So on a 45, 45, 90 triangle, you have these two sides. They're called the legs, okay? They are congruent to each other. And there's a special formula that we use for 45, 45, 90s. So we call our legs, we call those X, all right? And then there's a special thing that happens when you have this. And you can figure this out using the Pythagorean theorem, that every time you have a 45, 45, 90, your two legs are going to be X, and your hypotenuse is going to be X times the square root of 2. So it's just X square root 2. All right, this is like the formula every single time. Both of the legs, the two that are coming together to make the L, those are both X, and then your hypotenuse is X square root 2. So you kind of have to think, you have to separate yourself from like I'm finding X to understanding that we're using X as a stand-in for a number here, okay? So where do we see 45, 45, 90 triangles? A lot of times they'll give you a square, okay? And remember, on a square, all four sides are the same, right? If you take the diagonal of that square, you've created two 45, 45, 90 triangles. Because on a square, your angles are right angles. And also here, when I'm doing the diagonal, I've taken this 90-degree angle and I've cut it in half. And what's half of 90? 45. So that's where you usually see 45, 45, 90s. So just kind of keep that in mind. So we've got our two legs, all right? Your legs are equal to each other. And then the hypotenuse, okay, remember this long side, this is your hypotenuse. Okay, and this is a leg here, and this other side is also a leg. All right, your hypotenuse is the leg times the square root of 2. Okay, so now we're going to do some examples. All right, in this first example, example 1, we see we've got the 90-degree angle here. So I'm going to draw an arrow straight across. This is my hypotenuse, all right? And then these are my two legs, the other two sides. Those are my legs, and I know that they are congruent to each other. So if this first one is 17, I know that this other one over here is also going to be 17, okay? Now, remember, in the 45, 45, 90, each leg is X, right? So in our case, X is 17. And so now to find the length of that hypotenuse, It's x square root 2. Well, what is x? It's 17. So it's 17 square root 2. That's all you got to be able to do. All right, next example. Okay, example 2. This time we can see, again, always identify your hypotenuse by drawing a arrow across from that right angle. This is our hypotenuse, okay? This is our hypotenuse. So I'm going to label it hypotenuse. And remember, the formula for your hypotenuse is x square root 2. So to find out what x is, whenever you have it like this with square root 2, your job is easy. You just look at the number in front of the square root 2. So our x is 2. So now I know what my two legs are. They're both 2. And let's think about what's really happening here. All right, let's go back to example 1. Remember, your leg is x, right? Your hypotenuse is x times the square root of 2. So what we did on example 1 was we did 17 times the square root of 2. We did times because we're going from the leg to the hypotenuse. So leg to hypotenuse is going to be times. Now let's look at example 2. We're going backwards. Okay, example 2, we're going backwards. We're going from the hypotenuse back to the legs. So you're going to have to divide by the square root of 2. So what we did was 2 square root 2 divide by square root 2. So those square root 2's end up canceling out, okay? But if what I just said doesn't make any sense to you, just remember, if you know, like if your hypotenuse is already some number and then a square root 2 behind it, just take the number in front of that square root 2, and those are your legs. All right, now we're going to go on to some more complicated ones. So example 3 here. All right, we see this is a 45, 45, 90, and I know that, like when I see 145 here, I automatically know my other angle over there is 45, and then I've got the right angle here. Okay, you got to see the right angle and at least 145. Now I draw my arrow across. This is my hypotenuse over here. So I've been given a leg. The leg is 6 square root 6, okay? So that whole thing is our x. Now we do our other leg. Guess what? It's also going to be 6 square root 6. Now to find your hypotenuse, remember the hypotenuse is equal to the leg times the square root of 2. So you got to take that whole thing that is the leg. So we're going to do 6 square root 6 times square root 2. We're just substituting in. And so now we just multiply. Okay, remember when you're multiplying square roots, you multiply the numbers inside the square root, and the number that's in front, like if there's any numbers in front, they get multiplied together. So we have 6 here. There's no other number in front of the other square root, so just 6. And then we're doing 6 times 2 inside, okay, because those were both inside. So this is 6 square roots of 12. But again, we can't leave this here. We always have to simplify. So I would factor 12. All right, 12. It's 3 times 4. And you can do this in your calculator. You're doing it when you do that menu 2, 3, okay? And so now it's like if I've written out long ways, as I said. I have a pair of 2's. So I know I can bring a 2 outside of my square root. And then I have a loner, a 3. He's going to go back in. All right, so I have 6 times, I said I'm going to bring a 2 outside, and the 3 is going to go back in. So we just multiply this. 6 times 2 is 12, and then we'd bring the square root 3. So that's our hypotenuse, is 12 square roots of 3. Okay, so again, whenever you have that square root 12, you got to do the simplifying that we've done. And if you need a refresher, simplifying square roots, that video was on January 8th. Okay, so Yeah, the Friday of the first week we came back. Alrighty. So let's do our next example. All right, example 4. And this is our last example, but there's going to be some stuff I'm going to talk about, and it will be helpful for you on some of the problems that we have. All right, on this one, we see our right angle, and then we see it at 45, and so now we can put another 45 over here. So we have a 45, 45, 90. So I know my two legs are congruent, and then I have my hypotenuse. My hypotenuse is 10. So remember, if we're going from the leg to the hypotenuse, we multiply by the square root of 2. Well, if you want the leg and you have the hypotenuse, you take your hypotenuse and you divide it by the square root of 2. So in this case, my hypotenuse is 10. I'm going to divide it by the square root of 2. Now, we need to do what is called rationalizing. Now, this was also in the Simplifying Radicals video, so please make sure if after I explain this, if you don't understand it, go watch that video so you can understand. Okay, whenever you have that square root in the bottom, we have to get rid of it. So whatever the square root is, and I'm only talking about just the square root part. I have square root 2, so I'm going to put square root 2 on top, square root 2 on bottom, and we multiply this. Okay, now if you're an academic, you don't have to understand all the mechanics behind what we're about to do. If you're in pre-AP, we've been talking through this already. So 10, you multiply the tops. 10 times the square root of 2 is 10 square root 2. You just put them right next to each other. And then on the bottom here, you see how we have square root 2 times square root 2? Whenever you multiply a square root by itself, okay, so I'm doing the square root of 2 times the square root of 2, you just get that number on the inside. So in this case, I get 2. Now you check and you see, look at the numbers outside of the square roots, okay? Your square root is acting like a shield, protecting this 2 on top. I look at the 10 and the 2. Can I divide 10 by 2? Yes. So 10 divided by 2 is going to be 5. So at the end, this simplifies to 5 square roots of 2. And that would be each leg because they're congruent. All right, so you'll start noticing a pattern, especially on 45, 45, 90s, all right? Just when you are rationalizing, that's what this whole thing that we just did here, okay, you're gonna notice some patterns. So if you can find the patterns, it'll make your life easier. And again, if you need to review how to do this, go watch that Simplifying Radicals video, and that will really help you. Okay. So now just some tips before you leave, and this is especially true for my pre-AP kids. Some things that you'll see for 45, 45, 90s, okay, squares, all right, squares. To find the perimeter, okay, remember y'all, a square has 4 equal sides, and if you're gonna find the perimeter of something, you're adding up all the sides, right? So a square, since there's 4 of them and they're all the same, you just do 4 times the side length. That's your formula for the perimeter of a square. And then area, okay, area, you do, like if you have a rectangle, you do length times width. Well, for a square, your length and your width are the same, so you do side times side, aka side squared, okay? And then also think about the reverse. If you're gonna reverse the perimeter, you would do, like if you wanna get the side out, you could do perimeter divided by 4, right? And that would give you one side, okay? Perimeter divided by 4 would give you one side of the square. And then if you're going to reverse side square, well, So let's say they give you the area and you want to know just one side. Well, what's the opposite of squaring? Taking the square root. So one side of a square is equal to the square root of whatever the area is. All right, so those are the tips that I have for your problems, the word problems that you're going to get. Just make sure you're familiar with perimeter of a square, area of a square. Another popular one, there's one last one, area of a triangle, okay? Area triangle. It's 1/2 base times height, okay? So your base and your height are at the right angle to each other. So if you need to do area of a triangle, 1/2 base times height. If you have any questions, just let me know. All right, guys, that's all there is to it, and I will see you in the next one.